It was a night that sent shockwaves through the college basketball world. A night when the seemingly unstoppable force of Auburn basketball met an immovable object in Texas A&M. The Tigers, who had dominated the season with an iron grip on their ranking, walked into Reed Arena with the confidence of a team that had seen it all, conquered it all. But what they didn't see coming was a relentless, punishing performance from Texas A&M, a team that had been waiting for this moment, hungry for an upset, eager to make history. And make history they did. The scoreboard, reading 83-72 in favor of the Aggies, told only part of the story. The real story was written in the grit, the physicality, the sheer will of Texas A&M, who refused to let Auburn breathe, refused to let them dictate the game, refused to let them walk away with yet another victory. From the opening tip-off, it was clear that Texas A&M had a plan that involved suffocating Auburn's offense, closing down passing lanes, contesting every shot, and throwing their bodies into every battle for possession. Auburn, a team that had coasted through much of the season with dominant performances, suddenly found themselves struggling, unable to execute their usual fluid plays. Shots that usually fell with ease clanked off the rim. Passes that normally sliced through defenses were intercepted or disrupted. Every movement, every decision was met with resistance. The Aggies were not just playing basketball, they were making a statement. The energy in the arena was electric, a buzzing intensity that fed into every possession, every rebound, every breakaway. Auburn's players, so accustomed to dictating the tempo, now found themselves on their heels, reacting instead of executing. Then came the defining moments, the possessions that would change the trajectory of the game. With Auburn desperately trying to claw their way back, Texas A&M tightened the screws. Their defense was suffocating, their offense clinical. Every time Auburn seemed to gain a foothold, the Aggies answered. A deep three-pointer to silence a potential Auburn run. A thunderous dunk to electrify the crowd. A defensive stop that forced yet another turnover. The frustration on Auburn's faces grew with each passing minute. They weren't just losing a game, they were being outworked, outfought, outplayed. And for the first time in a long time, doubt crept into their eyes. Head coach Bruce Pearl watched from the sidelines, his arms crossed, his face a mix of disbelief and determination. He had seen his team battle through adversity before, but this was different. This wasn't just a bad shooting night or an off game. This was a team being physically dominated, something Auburn hadn't experienced in this way all season. The rebounds, the loose balls, the contested shots, Texas A&M wanted it more, and they were taking it. Pearl's voice could be heard above the deafening crowd, barking instructions, urging his players to dig deeper, to push harder. But the reality was setting in. This was Texas A&M's night. With each passing minute, Auburn's chances dwindled. Their usually reliable scorers found themselves locked down, their shots contested at every turn. Even when they managed to break through, Texas A&M responded with poise. It wasn't just about defense, it was about execution, about confidence, about a belief that they could take down the #1 team in the nation. And as the final minutes ticked away, it became clear that this belief would become reality. The final buzzer sounded. The crowd erupted. Texas A&M had done it. They had taken down the top-ranked team in the country. They had rewritten the narrative of their season. But the story didn't end there. Auburn, despite the loss, still held their ground in the rankings. Their body of work throughout the season was too strong to be undone by one defeat, no matter how shocking. And perhaps that was the most ominous takeaway from the night. Because while Texas A&M celebrated their historic victory, Auburn was left to stew in their frustration. They weren't going anywhere. If anything, this loss might have ignited something even more dangerous, a renewed hunger, a realization that nothing would come easy, and a determination to prove that this was nothing more than a temporary setback. The road to the championship was far from over, and Auburn still had everything to fight for. But on this night, under the bright lights of Reed Arena, the spotlight belonged to Texas A&M. They had taken down the giant, and in doing so, they had reminded the world that in college basketball, nothing is guaranteed. As the Texas A&M players stormed the court in celebration, the echoes of history being made filled the arena. The energy, the disbelief, the sheer euphoria of toppling the #1 team in the country coursed through the stands and onto the hardwood. For Auburn, the sight was painful. Players walked off the court with heads down, frustration etched across their faces. The journey that had felt so smooth, so destined for greatness, had just hit an unexpected roadblock. But in basketball, as in life, it's not about the fall, it's about how you rise. Inside the Auburn locker room, the mood was somber. The usual post-game chatter was replaced with silence, the kind that only comes when a team is forced to reckon with a brutal reality. The reality that their dominance wasn't invincible, that for all their talent, all their victories, they could still be beaten. And that realization hit hard. Bruce Pearl stood in the center of the room, his gaze shifting from one player to another. He could see the frustration, the disappointment, but also something deeper, resolve. "This isn't the end," Pearl finally said, his voice cutting through the silence. "It's a wake-up call." Auburn had two choices now. Let this loss define them, or use it as fuel to push even harder. As the players sat in quiet reflection, one thing became clear: this wasn't over. They still had their ranking. They still had their shot at the championship. And they weren't about to let one bad night change that. Outside the locker room, the media swarmed, eager for reactions. Reporters fired off questions about what had gone wrong, about whether this loss exposed weaknesses, about whether Auburn was truly as dominant as their record suggested. But Auburn's response was measured. No excuses, no blame, just an understanding that they had been outplayed, and a promise that it wouldn't happen again. Meanwhile, Texas A&M basked in the glory of their triumph. Social media exploded with reactions. Videos of fans storming the court went viral. Analysts dissected every moment of the game, breaking down how the Aggies had managed to disrupt Auburn's rhythm so effectively. This wasn't just an upset, it was a statement. A message to the entire college basketball world that rankings meant nothing once the game began. That heart, grit, and determination could overcome even the most polished teams. For Auburn, the road ahead suddenly seemed more treacherous. Every team they faced from this point on would see an opportunity. If Texas A&M could do it, why couldn't they? The target on Auburn's back had grown even larger. But that's what made champions, facing adversity and rising above it. And Auburn knew this all too well. They had built their season on dominance, but now they would have to build their legacy on resilience. The next few days were crucial. Film sessions dissected every mistake, every missed opportunity. Practices became more intense, more focused. Auburn wasn't just preparing for their next opponent. They were preparing to prove a point, to remind everyone why they had been the #1 team in the first place. Bruce Pearl's message was clear. They had to be tougher. Texas A&M had exposed a weakness, and now it was up to them to close that gap. Defense had to be sharper. Offense had to be more decisive. They had to play with the same hunger that Texas A&M had shown them. And so the stage was set. The loss had been a gut punch, but the response was what mattered now. As Auburn stepped back onto the practice court, the fire in their eyes was unmistakable. This was no ordinary team. This was a team with something to prove. And the rest of the season? It was about to get very interesting.